Outlook Business Investment Summit 2021 is brought to you by ICICIdirect.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Outlook Business Investment Summit 2021. The topic for this discussion revolves around the theme of our summit this year, which is investing in the age of uncertainty. And we will focus on what to expect this fiscal and how to position yourself as an investor. I have with me four eminent speakers: Ajay Bagga, Executive Chairman, OPC Asset Solutions. Ajay has led financial institutions across sectors and worked with global market leaders like Citibank, General Electric, and Deutsche Bank. He served on various financial industry committees and has been the chairman of Financial Planning Standards Board of India. And then I have Sushant Bansali, CEO, Ambit Investment Advisors. Before asset management, he led Ambit's principal investment business, and before joining Ambit, he worked with MSCI and PwC. And then I have Ambarish Baliga. Ambarish is an influential voice in stock markets and provides both strategic advice to mid-sized corporates and equity advice to HNIs and family offices. And then I have Sandeep Sabharwal, investment advisor and research analyst. Sandeep worked with SBI Mutual Fund for the first 11 years of his career. After that, he was the CIO of JM Financial Asset Management Company and the head of PMS division of Prabhudas Lilladher. Thereafter, now he's an independent investment advisor. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this discussion today. My first question is really a macro question, and probably Ajay can take this up. This calendar, Ajay, we started on a rather exuberant note, and then the budget led everyone to believe that growth will come back with a vengeance this year, also because of the base effect of last year. The government itself pegged growth at 14%, and the majority opinion on the street was that the numbers were conservative. Considering that a large part of India is seeing some kind of restriction in economic activity right now, what do you think will be the economic scenario for the rest of the year?
Okay, since it's economics, I'll start with that. Otherwise, I would defer to Sandeep always, but I'll start. Economic growth, you can roughly say 1% per month of lockdown will go down. So, but there will be growth eventually. It is a vaccine versus virus issue. We have lost in these 2 months. The vaccines have taken a backseat. I am hoping that by July, there would be some traction building up. And yesterday, the data which the government has put out that they would like to see more than 250 million vaccinations being done per month by the end of the year. So it will have to wait for 50-60%, but lockdowns, I think, are here to stay for the next 3 to 4 weeks at least. So probably single-digit growth for this year, unlike what we anticipated in December. That has gone down. Second, the big thing we have to understand is that last year people delved into their savings and survived. This year around, there are not, that cushion is not there in a large portion of the economy. Already on the World Hunger Index, we were 94th out of 107. The millions have fallen into extreme poverty. Luckily, there is no starvation death because of the cereals being given out, the food being given out. So there is no starvation at least, but extreme poverty has increased, unemployment has increased. MSMEs and certain sectors will take a very hard knock with this lockdown too. So that will have an impact, but overall we will rebound. By now, half two has probably moved to early next year. It will be a function of vaccines and how fast we get the daily numbers down. I think that will be the fight for this year.
Sure. So Ajay seems to be more or less circumspect, not positive, not completely underwhelmed. So any of you have a completely contrasting view over things that, no, this is going to pass in 1 or 2 months, the government will get its act together, we'll be back to, if not 14%, 10% growth by the end of the year? Or that, no, this is terribly challenging, we are going to go into a secular phase, this virus is not going away in 3 or 6 months, it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years for it to resolve, and it'll keep being a pain point which can, every now and then come and resurface and spoil the party. Either of these extreme opinions, any of you have? Otherwise, we can move on.
In fact, I mean, I really don't have an extreme opinion, but it's somewhere in between. I mean, clearly, I don't expect the economy to, in fact, bounce back in the next 3 or 4 months, or nor am I saying that it'll take another 3 or 4 years for the economy to bounce back. But then I think it'll be somewhere in between.
Sure. Sandeep?
Yeah, just to add to what Ajay said, I think the only thing he missed out, he gave a very comprehensive analysis, was that last year, same time when the downturn happened, there was no inflation. This time we are grappling with a high amount of inflation. In fact, if whoever attends company conference calls, I think the key word being used by most company managements is inflation, and how they are dealing with it and how it's impacting their businesses and possible impact on profits. And to that extent, that's a big differential, and that could impact consumer behavior. So last time, like Ajay said, people dipped into savings, and on top of that, you had huge RBI and government stimulus last year. This year, as it is, if you go through the budget numbers, government was not expected to spend much more than last year. So there was no fiscal stimulus. So the expectation was monetary plus the general upturn in the economy will benefit. But I think that might not play out because of the fact that there is no additional stimulus. So that doesn't help you incrementally. And on top of that, people lose their incomes and they get hit by inflation. So I think those are the challenges the economy will have to deal with.
Sure. So Shyam?
Probably we are the group slightly more optimistic than everybody else here, right? Our belief is that last year was sort of a complete black hole where nobody knew anything, and that led to severe actions both by government as well as by everybody in general public. Government took nationwide lockdowns without realizing the impact it might create in terms of job loss and many other things. And general public also, especially the migrant labor, I think the fear was so high that they thought that it's best to go back to their roots because they are safer there. So the fear of life was on general public's mind, while government was sort of trying to just kill the virus, assuming that 2 or 3 week lockdown might work. This time, I think there's definitely a long tunnel, but there's some light at the end of tunnel, which probably everybody is wanting to see in terms of vaccination. So just on 2 or 3 optimist scenarios, if they play out, we believe that there is a chance that Indian economy might still grow with a double digit this year, right? And what are those assumptions? Probably we are on the downward trend. The peak is behind us in terms of second wave. And if that holds true, we'll get to know in another 2 or 3 weeks once there are more trends to suggest that. Last 1.5 weeks suggest that we are on the downward trend. Definitely cities like Bombay and Delhi have seen their peaks, looks like. There is no certainty to that, but right now it looks like that. And gradually the lockdowns have increased across the country. Started with Maharashtra first. I think Maharashtra was the first one in early April to start that, and gradually it picked up everywhere. But this time the lockdown is very different. Last time when the lockdown started, almost everything other than essential goods were barred from opening. This time, most of the manufacturing units are working, albeit at a lower capacity levels because of the lower demand, of course, as well as the safety norms being followed. But the overall economy has not halted like it did last time. And whenever the economy halts, it's very difficult to bring it back on track very soon. It takes time. This time, because it is not halting, it is only slowed down. I would say it will take probably less time to recover back from those shocks. Even the migrant laborers probably now have realized that given that there is a chance to get a vaccine, there is not much of migration back, right? People are staying, and there is probably a lower amount of job loss as well. Also, now people are ready for the lockdowns and everything else in terms of whether keeping savings aside for the rainy day, which was not the case probably. Probably people were spending more and not saving. I think the tendency of saving definitely has increased. Our view is that if we see this wave going down gradually and the vaccination picking up, I think vaccination is the key which we'll be looking at. By June, we expect the vaccination supply to resume normally and increase the number of shots people can get every day from June onwards. With the few more vaccines on the agenda of the government to clear, both Sputnik as well as Pfizer and probably Moderna too, then there will be an increased supply. And if by Diwali time we are 30-40% vaccinated as a country, then probably the economy will be back on a roll. And like what we saw last time, there was a big pent-up demand. And whatever we heard from people in various states is that they have never seen such a season in their last 10-year careers. What happened between September and probably February, March, right? And we believe that there is a repeat of that. Sitting at home, I think everybody is eager to spend more once things become normalized. And if by Diwali time vaccination is almost 30-40% done, then will gradually reach to herd immunity levels by December onwards. Right? So the largest states which got into lockdown first will probably reach to normalcy quite soon. And that should lead to the GDP slowing down, which is happening currently, to pick up again. And that leads us to believe that the H2, if it's like super like last year, then because of the low of base of last year, we might still get a double-digit growth.
Okay, that seems like a minority opinion to me. And in the markets, they say minority opinion wins. So we all hope for the sake of that, your minority opinion does win for, so it's a win for everybody then. So Ajay, back to you. There were three things that were fundamental to achieving growth for this year, the way the budget portrayed it. One was maintaining the government spending program of last year. It wasn't an increase really, but just maintaining that spending. Second was better tax collections. And third was a steep hike in the disinvestment targets that the government hoped to achieve. Now, amongst these three, where do you see the maximum risk? One part of it is, what's happening to the economy, virus, and all of that, which of course is like it's the macro variable that will impact everything. But specifically on the finances part, because if these three things is what the market really cheered, everybody in business cheered, where does the risk really reside?
Well, Mahar, one thing is that the budgeting maths just took in what was extra budgetary expenditure and added it on. So they used this last year's pandemic mathematics to bring in money that they were already spending. So actual spending is not really incrementally going up. That's a big risk, unlike the rest of the world. And if you add up all the fiscal and monetary stimulus across the last year from, say, March 1 last year till date, it is already more than $24 trillion. On an 80 trillion global economy, people have spent 10 to 15, some economies have spent 20% of their annual GDPs in stimulating their economies. We have done nothing like that. Still, what Sandeep said, we are facing a big inflation monster staring at us. So it's a very difficult situation the government is in. Tax GDP has really gone down. Already it was an abysmal 12%. Now I would suspect it's even lower than that. But the GDP growth also has fallen off. So I don't know where that will be, but revenues are under stress. This has to be a World War II kind of a response where you have to issue pandemic bonds. There are hundreds of flexible ways to do it. You tell people that I will not give you returns, but you get a tax waiver today if you go into this, or issue them as tax-free bonds at very low rates. Anyway, but you have to raise extra budgetary money and put that back. Privatization, we have abysmally failed for the last few years. It won't happen this year also. All this is just up in the air, the Air Indias and the BPCLs and all. Nobody knows who are the suitors, who's going to come in. And aviation this year as a sector will make more than 20,000 crore losses in the year that's just gone by. So where will anyone come into a country with these kind of issues? So I think the bigger part is how early do we spend Second, the big lesson is you have to stop this trickle-down theory now, the top-down planning. It has to go down to the grassroots. The states that did better were the ones with the stronger panchayati structures and ability to reach relief at lower levels. We have underspent on education, water, sanitation, healthcare. That has to come back, and there is no money to do that. So you will have to borrow from the future. Either the RBI prints or you issue these COVID relief bonds and get it. Then give things like whoever gives jobs now gets a big tax relief, as used to happen. I remember in the 90s when we would put up new projects, states would come to us that you please come in and I'm giving you a tax holiday, and per job created, this is the subsidy I'll give you. Third, give subsidies to people like Section 80C. Convert that into, you buy a durable, you buy a two-wheeler, you buy a car, and I'm giving you increased a tax rebate on 80C on that. So you have to get consumption from the consuming classes, from the afflicted classes. We have to give them food, and we have to give them dole-outs. So, credit money into the Jan Dhan accounts, decide what is the level the farmers we are paying. I think a one-time money has to be put into the accounts, what Hong Kong did last year to all citizens, what US, the most, the biggest economy, is doing it. Trillions of dollars they are pumped into their citizens' accounts. I think something like that is needed. It cannot be a bureaucratic solution. It has to be an expert solution, and with political will backing it. All three are lacking and have been proved very poor in India, unfortunately.
So political will is one thing, but do we really have the wherewithal and ability? Because US is US and dollar is the reserve currency. So the conversation for US, I think, can't be mixed with any of the other countries. But that apart, Ambrish, how do you think investors, foreign investors, will view this whole idea? Because we've oversold this idea of India, to my mind, that we say that we have growth economy, we have demographics in favor of us, we have so many things going, we'll still keep, even if we are slower than what we were, we are still the fastest growing, and so on and so forth. And we all know that the government finances are really not as pretty as even they are projected to be. So now, if we take to pandemic bonds or any of these ideas which seem like the right thing to do, but the market should also be willing to buy into it. The global investors should be willing to buy into all of this for you to get out of this situation. So do you see that as a challenge?
No, I clearly see foreign investment as a challenge. Clearly looking at the way we are going, because whatever said and done, I think because of the lockdown and severe restrictions, the economy is bound to suffer, no doubt. And we will see the analysts also revising the guidance figures. And the sort of, the major bounce back which we had seen last year in the demand. There was pent-up demand in 2020. But I think the second wave is going to be far more damaging than what we had seen last time. Although we are saying right now that possibly the peak is behind us, and I think that's possibly in tier 1 cities, but lately rural India is reporting a higher number of cases. And this time I see the emotional damage to be much deeper and wider. So I think clearly the consumers may prefer to save for a rainy day, as well as you'll have the fears of the third wave, which will linger on. So I think the demand may not be as good as what we saw last time, post the opening of the economy. So clearly you'll have these GDP forecasts also being downgraded. Already we are down from that 12.8, which was being forecasted in January, February. We are already, the forecasts are at 9.4. And I'll not really be surprised if it goes to about 7% or so. And although the industries, unlike last year, they have not really been asked to shut. But looking at the demand slowdown and the supply chain issues, I think clearly will reduce the efficiency. And quite a few of them have already voluntarily shut operations. We have seen this in the auto sector. And I think the most affected in the whole thing is going to be the bottom of the pyramid, whether it's individuals or these smaller businesses. And we really can't have a sustainable economic recovery unless everyone is participating in the economy, which I think will take a while. So, like I said, I mean, actually don't expect a major pullback in the demand. And like last year, I mean, when we got into this pandemic, the first wave, there was a lot of fear. And it actually ended up in a lot of confidence, saying that, I mean, that's behind us. We said we have defeated COVID-19. But then this second wave actually started off with a lot of confidence that we would be safe. But I think it's going to end up with a lot of fear because of whatever has happened and the fear of, the third wave. And as far as the markets are concerned, I think it was a different story because we had more than about 1 crore new investors coming in. And they've consistently made money in the last, 8-12 months. And so the confidence level is still very high because people continue to mint. And they've been shifting funds from other asset classes to equity because this was one of the very few performing classes. And because of which it's become sort of a virtuous cycle. But you're talking of FIs. I mean, FIs were a bit late in coming into the markets post the pandemic, but they've been quite early now to start exiting. I mean, we have seen that in the last couple of weeks. And we have also seen that the mutual fund flows are not really matching the FI outflow. I mean, this was the case in the last so many years. FI are selling, mutual funds are buying, or the mutual funds are selling and FIs are buying. But then this time, I think clearly it is the retail which is supporting the markets because every time there's a correction, it's seen as a discount sale. Right. And along with this, what we've seen the last many months is that the corporate India also has been supporting with a good bounce back in earnings. And this is basically thanks to the cost savings which have happened because of the pandemic, lower raw material inventory costs. And most important is that the corporate India, I mean, the listed entities, the larger ones, have been able to increase their market shares compared to the smaller counterparts. So actually the pain is in the SME and the micro businesses. So actually the big has become bigger. Right. Now the question is as to, these operational costs have now started moving up. Since there's a limit to how much you can do cost cutting quarter on quarter, input costs have gone up. Demand may actually remain subdued. So we have a problem on hand. So I think finally it will dawn on everyone that everything is not hunky-dory, and that's when the correction will start. We have already seen a bit of correction, but it's nothing much because every time there's a correction, people come in to buy. But once there's a decent correction, I don't know how these investors who are supporting the markets right now will react. So there could be a panic because since they have never experienced losses, once they start experiencing losses, there could be a panic. And I don't expect FI support at that point of time because clearly when a country is in trouble, there is an issue both economic as well as health. I doubt whether the FI investors or even FDI would come in a big way, at least in the foreseeable future. Because personally also I have experienced some of the deals that I was doing where, I was expecting foreign investment to come in. More or less everything was done. DD was done. They were about to sign and everyone packed off and went back. So right. I think it's going to be difficult, at least in the foreseeable future, expecting foreign investments.
Sure, fair enough. Sandeep, do you see at any stage as we struggle with the country's finances, do you see that becoming a big issue and leading to a panic sell-off from FIIs?
Yeah, Mahalakshmi, so what happens is that global markets tend to be correlated to a very great degree. So what will happen is any huge outflow will have to be a global sell-off, because India's specific sell-off is very tough unless and until you go into some sort of a currency crisis which doesn't look imminent given our forex reserve and the kind of external balance that we have at this stage and the reserves. So my guess is if you look at valuations all over the world, you look at valuations of the US markets, they have never traded at these valuations ever in the past. Even in the .com era, the broader valuations ex of tech were not so high as we see out there. So there is there's a definition of bubble which say what is a bubble? A bubble is when the incremental buyer doesn't look at the valuations, so he just buys. He's not bothered about the valuations. So the question we need to ask ourselves is: are we at that kind of stage right now? In my view, to a great extent, we are at that stage, because even if you look at what's happening on the cryptocurrency front, people don't know why they are buying. People are buying just because it goes up every day. So that's something which we've seen in the past. So my view is that at some stage we'll get a global sell-off. At that stage, in India, we might sell off more than the world, given our own macroeconomic scenario. And that is what investors should be playing as the base case scenario now. So base case should be, there will be a big sell-off in the markets over the next 2-3 months. Now, if we get saved from that somehow, great, superb, doesn't matter, but that's what you should form your view on. In my view, that's my view. And once that sell-off happens, and once that sell-off happens, that will then give the opportunity for investors to come in and buy stocks at valuations which might be much cheaper than today. Because my frank view is that vaccines work. They have been proven to work in countries which have been heavily inoculated, be it UK, Israel, and now USA. They will work in India also. It will be delayed here. Eventually, things will normalize. And once things normalize, we believe India has grown in adversity. We will grow in adversity again. So if you are looking at a 5-year view, it doesn't matter so much. But then given the way markets have moved up, you look at what markets have done from March 20 till now. Even if some markets correct 20% from the top, it will just be a normal market correction because you have gone up 100, 150%. So even a 20% correction is a normal correction. But for the new buyer who's been coming in last 6 months, can he take a 30, 40% drawdown in the stocks they have bought into? I think that's the question people need to ask.
Sushant, where do you stand on this? On India being a unique sell-off, is that a possibility?
Most of the flows nowadays from global investors are not from any India-specific funds. These are mostly emerging market funds or global allocations. The weight of India isn't changing too much in most of the indices which these funds follow as a benchmark, or even the passive funds for that matter, right? So we are not expecting, unless there is a global sell-off, as Sandeep rightly said, unlikely that we'll see last sell-offs. The sell-off so far last 2 months have been, or rather 1.5 months, are around $3 billion or so, a little less than $3 billion till yesterday, right? Which is not very large amount. I think we saw inflows almost $5-7 billion a month in few months in last 1 year. And there were many months with the $2 or $3 billion of inflows. So far it has not been. The yield curve where it is moving in US markets probably will define if there is a global sell-off and there is a risk of sentiment which emerges out. And if that happens, then probably there will be a sell-off across all the geographies, which is what happened last year in March, April, right? And then there definitely will be a case for a good amount of FI sell-off from this country. Otherwise, on a base case, pure long only or India-focused investors, I doubt that there will be too much impact.
What are the global cues that you are looking at? I mean, you're saying the trigger has to come from outside. So what are the numbers and data that you are closely watching to see if there are any smoke signals?
I think the data we need to watch is one, global inflationary trends. And I think they become the most important at this stage. Because like I said, even in Indian conference calls, if you attend conference calls of US companies, most of those companies are also talking about significant inflation. In fact, the unemployment benefits and all have been given up so much in the US that people are not being able to hire even at very high wages. So I think there is definitely an inflationary trend. How long can central bankers say there is no inflation? I don't know. Our central bank also says there is no inflation. Next week, petrol in Mumbai will be 100 rupees a liter. So if you and me feel there is no inflation or not, I'm not so sure. So I think that's one thing which I'll keenly watch. And that will, and the impact of that on bond yields, because this time, given the way bonds have moved even till now, let's not assume they'll sell off more. This might be the first year in the last 4 to 5 decades where bond funds globally will end up giving negative returns, which has never happened in 40, 50 years. So what that does to the portfolios of investors like pension funds, etc., which have a huge proportion in fixed income, and to that extent, they don't make returns. So I think though that is the critic. So if you ask me to track one thing, I think I'll track that, and the impact of that on the US dollar index right now, because of the huge bond buying of the US Fed, the US dollar index is trending lower, but it's not going as low as what people expected. So if there is a snapback in the US dollar, the impact of that on commodities as well as risky assets globally could be very severe.
Sorry, this question will take us down a different path, but still I just want to spend 1 minute on this because you talked about negative returns on bond funds. You know, how do, and these are really large issues because you have large pension funds, and obviously a larger amount of money is invested in fixed income, and from the government's perspective, this is a huge issue. So what does this mean from a policy perspective?
So far, the central banks globally have been quite, I would say, progressive, and they have been printing money before people started worrying about it. I think they were quite ahead of the time, and probably this time also they might be ahead, that they are sensing the inflation. Definitely, if you look at whether it's metals, commodities, or even agro, soya and all is 50% in this calendar year. So it's a big global agro inflation also inching up. Sugar, wheat, everything is up double digits already in just first 4 months of this calendar year.
So the reason I was asking this, Sandeep, is because it's very possible that because of this bond fund compulsion, the governments may not be motivated to raise interest rates. Even if there is inflation, they have to look at, you know, how do you address these things, not through the monetary policy. And maybe will we be then focusing on the wrong variable?
No, it's true. Like they might try to keep the bond yields down, but when inflation moves up to 4, 5, 6%, do you expect a 10-year bond yields to remain at 1.5, 1.6% is the question. So how long do you fight the market? So one is, people say don't fight the Fed. So, but at some stage, the leverage or the impact of these policies reaches a level where the market starts betting against the central banks, and the market starts winning. So I think that is a scenario which is the most dangerous. So I hope we don't come to that head. The global central bankers start realizing the inflationary impact, start changing their communication, and to that extent, markets will get comforted. But if they don't, then I think that the dichotomy between what's actually happening on the ground and what the communication the policymakers are trying to give us, I think that will be extremely discomforting and could lead to asset price distortions, which we might not have seen after the year 2008.
So now we'll start talking about the markets, because economy is a different animal. That's the only thing I've learned in the last 20, 25 years of being a financial reporter, that markets and economy are two different animals. So coming back to markets, Ajay, you were saying that the disinvestment targets are very unlikely to be met this year. And but in February, all of us were very optimistic and said this is going to be a record year and so on and so forth. And now, whether or not it happens, the market seems to be already acknowledging and assuming that all this is going to happen, and PSUs have made a comeback. And you've seen, like, even in the past few weeks, a lot of stocks have gone up. So do you see disappointments there, or is this just sector rotation at play?
You know, some of this one just cannot understand, like public sector banks, for example. They are always behind the curve. Now, the issue will come on the retail NPAs this time around. You will see a huge issue there. And MFIs are getting hit already, even small finance banks you're seeing. But public sector banks are being bid up. What will happen there, I really don't understand. And you know, I would not be so optimistic on the public sector companies' rallies. Again, the caveat is we have not made money over such a long time in these companies. And when you have high growth segments available, India, you're playing a risk market. And, you know, rather, I would go with where the growth is and stick to quality. Public sector, I don't find that quality. Again, disinvestment target will be met if we can do the LIC IPO. That is very critical. At least now for the next few months, we don't have that visibility, but liquidity is there at the right price. You will find takers for it. So probably that will get it done. But the big ones, you just keep hearing about it, but you see underperformance. And anyone coming in, the normal guys who have done it in the past and who know how to handle these workers' unions and all that. So the cronies will come in and they will buy some of these. Otherwise, second model is you make one behemoth buy out another, like we saw with ONGC, HPCL. Third, LIC being the buyer of last resort, you might not want to do it in an IPO year because it will become very high recency. So that's why I'm uncomfortable. So maybe LIC IPO saves us, but otherwise it will be more of the government,
Sure.
accounting and creativity. I would say rather do that in creatively, raising money.
Ambarish, back to PSUs. How do you see the surge in PSU stocks lately?
See, again, the PSU stock surge has been more due to divestment, at least the talk of divestment.
Nice.
And just like Ajay was saying, like wherever there's momentum today, because of the huge number of retail investors which are there, whichever stock there is momentum, whichever sector there's momentum, there's enough number of people running after that. And with more liquidity getting into those specific stocks or that sector, you naturally have those stocks moving up, and that continues for a while. So, like what I would look at is wherever there is momentum. In fact, I'm personally utilizing that to, at least book out to a certain extent and get into cash.
This year, if you were to, you seem to be slightly more bearish than the rest of the people. So what are your hiding grounds?
Actually, I'm not bearish. I'm realistic. And I actually realized that after I turned realistic from being extraordinarily bullish all the time, I started making more money. So I'd rather stick to this. So I think what I'll say is that there are opportunities, obviously, there, which will be specific to specific companies, specific segments. So what will happen is the overall economy might not do as well. There'll be domestic sectors which will not do well. For example, there's still a belief that consumer durables, non-durables will bounce back the fastest after this move ends. And to that extent, those should be bought. But I think severe income stress, huge amount of families getting impacted, and high inflation will make that tough. But I think on the investment side, the cycle will continue. So there will be opportunities on the investment side, which was totally ignored, where some companies are still cheap, where the execution cycle has not got impacted so much due to the lockdown. And because interest rates are still low and will remain low for the foreseeable future, that's where some more value could get created, and those are under-owned sectors. The second is there could be specific opportunities because of specific events which are happening. For example, there's this huge ethanol blending program, there's the biomass program, there's the program where government is trying to control pollution, both water and air. So I think there are specific companies operating in those segments which will do well. We can capture those. Then export-oriented companies will do well because the global economy will recover much faster than India. So to that extent, there could be opportunity in textiles, which was subdued. There is a huge demand. Some of the textile companies you talk to, there is a huge demand coming in from export markets. So that could be an opportunity. IT companies guidance, all of us have seen, they have been giving reasonable guidance. So those stocks are not cheap. The larger IT companies are not cheap, but they are a safety net given their cash generation, buybacks and dividend payouts. And pharma specific companies will be an opportunity. So it's not that there are no opportunities. I think there are opportunities in specific segments, specific companies, but it might not be in the segments which people think. So people tend to go and buy financials. In financials, the retail NPS test will be real. People want to go and buy all these consumer companies trading at 80, 90 PE at a time when actually growth will slow down, profit margins will decline. So this might not be the time to buy them. So I think that's how I look at the overall scenario in a nutshell.
Shashank? if you were to just map the market, if you can map the market in terms of bracket which looks like which can sustain earnings growth over the next 1 to 3 years and look reasonably valued versus those which will not be able to sustain earnings growth from here on but are richly valued.
Sure. So I would say, I think we need to get out of this mindset of what is looking good today and what is looking good from a long-term point of view, right? Making money in equity market is very simple, but you need to be disciplined. Identify a good set of companies who have done superbly well in last few years, and they are in sectors which are expected to do well. If they have good management teams and if they are good in good sectors, they will have a great earning run from here on as well, right? So I think one needs to just look at those companies, and if there is a correction in the market, let's say, then use that opportunity to get in those names. And if they are already in that name, then just stay put. I think many a times not doing anything makes more money, right? Sitting today, if you ask me, what we witnessed in the last the first wave, if we can say that, was that there was a K-shaped recovery where the unorganized sector was just wiped out, sort of, for a few months, and the organized sectors got the benefit when the demand came up because they were able to cater to the demand. What we are witnessing in the second wave today is that even on the organized side, the smaller players, the players with weak balance sheets and probably not so strong brand equity, they are suffering more than others. And next few months, once the pent up demand comes up again, the larger players in each sector, the players with strong balance sheet and great brand, I think they will do better in the near term, and probably they will garner much more market share. And the recovery of the weaker players will take probably about a year or two from here on. So from that perspective, identify good set of companies which have delivered well in the past in good sectors, and you are in the money, I would say.
So can you expand on that as attractive, but you can throw some light because the way the stocks have moved and how those valuations have panned out of the last 1 year. So this I thought is dynamic because the companies are the same, the managements are the same, the environment and the valuations change, and that should definitely prompt investors to look at these things and react dynamically.
See, broad sector changes, if you ask me what has happened in the last 1 year and which has changed probably outlook for few sectors. IT, I think, is the biggest beneficiary of this cycle. We are again probably witnessing another Y2K movement, which we witnessed in late 90s, right? The way every company, every organization is wanting to get themselves digital ready has been a big wave for all the IT companies across the geographies. So IT is probably in a multi-year bull run again. The second sector which witnessed, I think, and it's not about just about pandemic, I think even before pre-pandemic, was the chemical sector, where the China plus one thesis is going quite well. And given the lack of large chemical players in this country, there are few who are already there. And that's one sector where you suddenly cannot become an entrepreneur, right? It takes probably years and decades to become a chemical entrepreneur because of the chemistry and reactions and everything of safety and all the things put together. So chemicals and probably pharma you can club along with chemicals because they all, I think, fall in the same basket in our view. These are two sectors which have witnessed, I think, a good breakthrough in last 1-2 years and expected to do well. Financials are sort of an evergreen story. Of course, pandemic has got some distress into balance sheets of most of the companies, but there will be a set of winners and there will be a set of losers out of this pandemic. The players with strong balance sheet and strong deposit base, I think, will come out stronger, and there will be further consolidation in this sector. The big will become bigger and more bigger in times to come. So the market leaders in these segments, I think, will continue to do well. There might be few good players who are relatively small right now, but they have strong balance sheets and they are well capitalized. They probably will gain market share in their own environment and probably will come out as the real winners in terms of value creation in this cycle.
Sure. So you said pharma, you said China plus one, and you said
IT.
IT.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are your bets. All right. Ambarish, even Ajay can take this question because you spoke about banks, and largely from 2012-13 onwards, the stress has been on corporate banks because those balance sheets every year had surprises and they went from bad to worse. And it's only last year that we've so far not even had one bad retail cycle. It's always been a positive story, and it's only last year that people had some level of trepidation about whether this will become a reality in India. So from where the prices are now and how the balance sheets look right now, from SBI to Bajaj Finance, where do you see value? Because most people, most of us would agree that if you want to bet on India, even as a lay investor, if I want to take a 5-10 year view on India, then you can't ignore financials.
Right.
And keeping that in mind, how would you construct a bank exposure or bank portfolio right now?
No, see, in the last few years,
Or is it best to just avoid this phase because there is so much uncertainty, and you can always hop in when there is more clarity?
I would surely prefer to not really invest at this point in the BFSI space. But then if you are asked to choose which is better or which is worse, because in the last, 7-8 years, the pain was there in the corporate book. But now I think going ahead post-COVID, I think those who have a decently large, corporate book, especially the better of the companies, I think that would be a safer space to be in as compared to those who are lending to retail and the SME space, because this time, like I said, the pain is more at the bottom of the pyramid. So, especially the MFIs and the small payment banks and NBFCs who are lending to the retail, I think the pain would be in that space. So I think that would be clearly be avoidable. And at the same time, we are seeing most of them are quoting at very high sort of valuations. So could be a good time to exit. And regarding pharma, possibly I have a slightly different view. Although they have performed decently well in the last 1.5-2 years, and especially, once we had this first phase of COVID, pharma has been in demand, basically because of COVID-related drugs and vaccine, which is sentimentally a good story.
Right.
But I don't know how much of that will translate into revenue for the listed players.
Correct.
But I think what could turn out to be a very big story going ahead over the next few years, maybe the next decade, is that COVID is expected to leave patients with long-lasting health issues. And I think this will become a big story for pharma, at least in India, over the next 10 years or maybe more. So,
I think one question I wanted to ask about metals. The surge in metal stocks and also the profitability of some of the companies, the numbers that people are reporting, comes as a humongous surprise to me. So, Sandeep, probably you can take this question. Are you surprised, and is this sustainable?
So whether we are surprised with the kind of earnings, the rally in metals, obviously, yes. Like I, for one, did not expect this kind of rally in metals. And to that extent, but all of us know that the profitability of metal companies are highly leveraged to the metal price movement. So 1% up move typically could lead to a 5% increase in earnings. To that extent, earnings growth which is getting reported was something which was reasonably predicted. Right. Now, the sustainability is, then the question comes of sustainability. Now, when metal stocks were 1/5 of the current price, no one wanted to buy them. Today, they are 5 times, so everyone is talking about a commodity super cycle. Now, I think the truth is somewhere in between. I think the truth is that there was a huge underinvestment in commodities for nearly a decade. So that's leading to this kind of up move which is happening. It will sustain for a period of 2 to 3 years till new capacities are planned and start coming up. But whether these stocks and the metal prices will sustain at those high levels is a very tough call, because even at the price at which they are, currently the companies are suffering in terms of the consuming class. The inflation is picking up. So the day there is some action which starts on the inflation and the US dollar index alone, which I talked of, starts rallying, we will see a decent sell-off in commodity prices also. So at that time, commodity stocks will also fall. And today we need to realize these are trader favorites. So all traders are just getting into these stocks. And to that extent, they are prone to significant corrections. But then I still think big capacity additions are 2-3 years down the line. So at some stage, whenever they sell off deeply, I think they could still be tactical bets for investments for a small part of the portfolio.
Moving away from equities, Ajay, if you can just give a sense of how do you, if you were to independently look at asset classes, and we're not going to get into the asset allocation, equities should be XYZ% depending on your age and all of that. Just look at all of them as pure asset classes from a 1-year perspective. What would you say is looking attractive today? Till last year, I mean, after the I think first quarter or second quarter into the pandemic, there were murmurs that residential real estate will make a comeback and prices had started inching up and all of that. Now, of course, nobody is talking about it. Obviously, people are not even going out, so there is no question of that happening. So, but the fact is that real estate has remained in either intact or in a corrective phase for now 8-10 years, at least 8 years. So considering real estate, and again, where interest rates are, the whole debt lot, I mean, open-end debt funds, the credit risk that we see because of all these lockdowns and the economic environment today versus equities. What would you say is looking attractive? How are the risk rewards stacked up today?
Well, I have been consistently wrong on this one. Whole of last year, I didn't expect that sharp a rally. And even now, I'm in the corner with Ambrish and Sandeep. I am, it's only the liquidity. It's that $23 trillion. The big question, when you go for allocation, you should ask, is this the roaring 20s again? What happened after the Spanish flu? We had 6-7 years of the jazz age. The whole world just partied like anything, and then it crashed in 29. So is this the roaring 20s or is it .com 2? .com 2, what we have to see, there are portions which are very highly valued, and you have seen FANGs, the way, the sell-off, whenever a sell-off happens, the FANGs get hit first, because that's the portion. So there is a 20% of the market which is at 140 or 180% of normal valuations, which will fall. There are portions where you can see safety. But if you ask me, I would sit in cash right now and wait this out, because it is going to come. Again, it might last for 2-3 years, so I'll probably be totally wrong. This liquidity will probably carry all asset classes higher, but at least I know where not to be. I would not touch office space. I would not touch hotels. I would not touch malls. I think that will take a long time. There is very severe behavior change which has come. It won't, people will not start opening offices, new offices, or taking new space in such a rush. So residential real estate for the first time owners, because we are a young country, affordable housing, those areas will work. You saw the HDFC results. KK Mistry said, I've never seen this kind of growth. Of course, it came off March, April, May, the kind of degrowth also that happened. But there will be pockets. I would be very wary right now. Long term, just keep invested because nobody knows. I was reading a very interesting research where they analyzed from 1926, they analyzed 66,000 companies across the world. And about 4% of the companies gave the market return. They contributed the entire market return. So guys like Ambrish and Sandeep can pick those companies. I cannot. I consult with them regularly and they help me out. For old time's sake, they give me free advice. So I'm well off that way.
Sure. Ambrish, what would be your pick?
No, in fact, I would not like to give specific stocks as my picks, but then what I see doing well, despite the sort of a slowdown which we are talking of because of the second wave, would be export-oriented companies. And among the export-oriented companies or sector, I think one which will continue doing well because of China Plus One would clearly be the specialty chemicals sector, where already we have seen a very decent move. But still, I think this sector will continue performing at least in the foreseeable future. And I say foreseeable future, at least the next 4-5 years.
But as stocks, will they be performing? Because most of them I see are like very, very highly priced.
That's true. That's
very high levels of growth for the next 4-5 years.
That's true. All of them have moved up. So, for the time being, like I said, I would prefer to stay in cash for the time being. And
Sure.
Once we have the correction, I think that's the time to start investing again. And one of the main sectors to be invested in would be specialty chemicals.
Sandeep, first debt or equity, and then within equities.
So I think debt and equity choice I won't make, because I think debt I don't think is going to do much at all. So I think if you want to be in debt, better be in FDs, because there you at least don't run the interest rate risk. You know what you are going to get. Now on equities, we cannot always be out of equities. So there will be some companies which are doing well at all points of time, but we need to be reasonably in cash. But I think the one asset class which will perform is gold. I think I think gold will do extraordinarily well for the next 1 or 2 years as inflation picks up, as people realize that inflation is an issue globally. We will see the price of gold move up. Currently, a lot of flows of gold have got diverted to cryptocurrencies, which at some stage, I think they're going to burst, and then people will realize what is a real asset is a real asset. So I think gold will outperform equities significantly as a basket. So on equities, I'm taking as investing in the Nifty or Sensex. So if we are investing in Nifty or Sensex, if we cannot outperform, or we think we don't have the ability to outperform, then I think gold will beat these asset classes hands down over the next 1 or 2 years. Specific equities will beat gold also hands down. So then, but then from someone who cannot do that kind of micromanagement, I think they need to be allocated to gold.
Tell me, Sandeep, this story is played out before, between 2005 to 9, when people said, okay, if there is, not only gold, but commodities was a hedge against the currency and all these risks related to monetary expansion. So would you say that's one of the reasons what is driving up metal prices? And if gold is a priority, is your pick, why not commodities and commodity stocks?
Because commodities are the ones which create the inflation, and gold is the hedge against that inflation. So then at some stage, because of that inflation going up so much, the demand for those commodities and those products starts falling. And then monetary policy has to act aggressively to control that inflation. So we have had a head. The first move has been in commodities. The second move will be in gold. That's what I think, because that will be the derivative of the inflationary pressures which will build up. But like I mentioned earlier, for commodity capacity to come up, to be planned and then come up, it takes at least 2-3 years, if not more. So to that extent, there could be scarcity in a lot of commodities still for the next 2-3 years. So some of those stocks on deeper corrections will always also provide opportunity.
So Shant, between debt and equities, what would you prefer? And real estate. I don't know if you do real estate.
I don't understand equity, debt, just understand equity.
Okay, cool.
So there is a single asset class focused towards, but definitely gold also, I believe that, I don't know how well it will do, but gold is a good hedge to have. Probably a very small portion of your portfolio one should always have in gold. It will, I think, protect you in times of need. There might be a 2 or 3 month or 6 months period. For that time period, you need to have gold in your pocket all the time.
Sure. So thank you, gentlemen. I've completely run out of time and consumed a lot of your time too. We've covered a lot of ground, from where the economy is headed to where the markets are headed and how to position yourself. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me today.
Thank you.